Hi guys, welcome back to Living the Gandy Life. Today I wanted to answer a question and share with you how I schedule our read aloud books for the year. Now I've mentioned before that I love Sunlight books and I love to pick and choose different books off their book list, as well as just some other different book lists that are out there. But the problem is that I don't buy the actual Sunlight curriculum. So I don't have anyone telling me which books to read, how many pages to read, and when to read the books. That falls on my shoulders, and so I have to pick and choose and schedule out when I want to read those particular books that I have chosen. I've also mentioned in the past that we have been a part of a classical conversations group where we use the Classical Conversations Foundations Guide. And in that guide, we have an outline for history in two different ways. We have a timeline that we learn the same thing every year, and we start with creation and we go all the way to present day with 9/11, and we cover just this historical world timeline of all these different historical events. But we also have a more focused history where each year it changes a little bit. This particular year's history is actually American history, where we are covering events from Christopher Columbus again to present day with 9/11. So when I had all of these books that I've picked and chosen from all these different book lists, I basically kind of laid them out and decided I need to find a week that corresponds as best as possible to what we're covering in history or science or geography or one of those different subjects that we're covering in our Classical Conversations Guide. Some of the ways that the books correspond with the weeks are going to be very obvious. Let me show you some examples. The very first week we're covering Christopher Columbus for history. So when I pull out this Dallaire book that obviously is titled Columbus, again, it's a picture book. It's a little bit longer of a picture book, so it's going to take us the entire week probably to get through it. But this one is obvious, right? I'm going to plug this into my Columbus week where I'm studying Christopher Columbus in our Classical Conversations Guide. Another example that I have is Pedro's Journal, which is a voyage with Christopher Columbus, and is kind of a journal that is made. And this is a scholastic book, but it's only like 80 pages long. It's got lots of pictures in them. The font is big, so it'll be a little bit easier to get through as well. So these are the two books that I've chosen to read on our week where we're covering Christopher Columbus. Again, it's obvious that they're going to line up, so it was an easy way to plug these books into our history. Another example that I have where we're studying the Pilgrims. So I have this easy read book here, this step 3 reader. Again, another picture book, but it's going to be an easy one to get through, but it's the first Thanksgiving. So this is one, again, an easy way to plug it into one of my weeks. The other one is the Thanksgiving Story, another picture book here. A little bit longer than the other one, so we've got a little bit more writing that we'll get through, but these are the two books that I plan to read during our week where we're talking about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower and the first Thanksgiving. Now, some other things that maybe are not history related. In one of our last weeks, again, I mentioned that we are covering U.S. history. We're also covering U.S. geography. And as we near the end of our year, we start covering prominent features. And one of those features is Mammoth Cave. So I have pulled out Caves and Caverns. And we're going, the week that we talk about Mammoth Cave, we're just going to read this book by Gail Gibbons about caves and caverns. In that same week, we actually are learning a list of all of the U.S. presidents. So we have this super fun book about, it's called So You Want to Be a President. And it just goes through lots of the different presidents and shows some funny things about them. You know, which ones had pets, what their jobs were before they were president. My kids love this page about President Taft, about their different sizes. You know, did they like to dance? Did they like to be public speakers? Different things, just their interests and hobbies and things as people, as well as them just being president. So it's a fun read as well. But this I'm plugging into the week that we're talking about all of the presidents. So those are really obvious ways to plug in. Now I have some other just chapter books that kind of fall in the same way. We have a week where we're talking about the Lewis and Clark expedition. So I have this chapter book, big font, should be, still longer, almost 200 pages, a few pictures in here, but this is what we're going to try and do as our read aloud when we're studying the Lewis and Clark expedition. And then you have some other books like this that are just easy to plug in. When I look at Johnny Tremain, I can look at the back and immediately know it's talking about the Revolutionary War. So I'm going to try and plug it into a week where we're talking about the Revolutionary War. Same thing here, Turn Homeward, Hannah Lee. When you look on the back, it says Civil War. So we have a couple of weeks where we're studying the Civil War. So in one of those weeks, or maybe over the course of 2 weeks, I'm gonna try and plug this book in when we're reading. And another one here, again, we're talking about the Revolutionary War. I can see General Washington mentioned on the back. So just from quick glances on the backs of books, looking at the information of what these books are about, I'm immediately told what's the historical context of this book. And then I look at my guide and I'm trying to plug it in as close as I can to that topic that we're scheduling. Sometimes they are not perfect. Let me give you a few examples of those. So here I have an example. This is a book about Robert Fulton, boy craftsman. My kids love to tinker around and to build things and to take old electronics and take them apart and build things with them. So I thought this one would be a fun one. He is kind of noted for being the creator of the steamboat. So but he liked to tinker and he liked to build and he liked to come up with ideas. And I thought it would be a fun read to kind of introduce my kids to that, about having these goals and to working toward things. Now, we are not studying Robert Fulton explicitly in any one of the weeks for classical conversations in my guide. So what did I do? I look in the book, and on the very first page, it tells me it is the year 1773. So immediately I take that and I go to my guide and I see, okay, I've got 1492, 1620, jumping up. Oh, okay, I've got in 1773 and 1776. So I might try to plug it into one of these weeks if there's room, because the years are lining up. It was generally around this time. That's how I'm going to plug them in. Again, if I have room for those weeks. Now, there are other ones I can easily look. Like when I looked at the matchlock gun, I did not know, I've never read this book. I didn't know the setting, the time period that it took place. I can look on the back and see it says in 1756. So again, I'm going to my book here and I'm going to try and put them in as close as I can to my timeline. And I've got several of these books, guys, where I didn't know exactly when they took place. This one on the back tells me 1835. I'm going to try and plug it in as closely to 1835. So when I flash forward in my guide, I can see I have an 1820 and an 1850. So I'm probably looking between weeks 8 and 9 in my guide where I'm going to try and put it in. Am I going to read it in week 8 or week 9? Might just depend on where I have room and where I have available time. So again, the sign of the beaver, when it doesn't have a date on the back, but I open it and it tells me it's set in the wilds of Maine in 1768. I'm going to try and piece it in there as best as I can. Here I have another one that tells me on the front or in the first page, 1849. So again, where can I put it in there? Now here is an example, this book. From the mixed up files of Miss Basil E. Frankweiler, I looked briefly. Again, I've not read this book. I looked briefly in the back, scanned through a few pages, did not find a year. I did notice, though, that in some of the pictures, it looked a little more modern. It looked like some kids were riding on a bus. And then all of a sudden, I noted on the back that it said, it mentions the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. I do know that I'm studying 9/11, which also is in New York City. So I decided I'm going to pair this one up, and it's just going to relate in geography. Has nothing to do with 9/11, but I'm going to read it, and we might try to tie a few things together because they're both taking place in New York City. So there are some ways that I'm tying things together. So I want to show you what I kind of use to sketch out my general plan. I literally grabbed 4 pieces of scrap paper that were used from something else and took the back. And we have 24 weeks in our foundations guide. So I put 6 weeks on each piece of paper. And I'll show you on the first one. I have the first 6 weeks listed out, and I even wrote the topic. I have Columbus, Pilgrims, Boston Tea Party, Declaration of Independence, George Washington, Louisiana Purchase. And you're gonna see my scratch notes of different books that I have planned for these weeks, okay? Now, some of them they're picture books, some of them are chapter books. It really is a wide range of different kinds of books. Some of them, you'll even note, are still blank. I have not figured out a book that I'm gonna read during the week that we're studying NATO, or US astronauts, or World War I. I don't have any books lined up for those weeks. So I have a few ideas for those empty weeks. I'm either going to use them as catch-up weeks, okay? Guys, this is a lofty goal, right? I have a ton of books listed here. Lofty goal, right? So I'm going to use those empty weeks as either catch-up weeks, or I'm going to use them to fill in with books that I call more like character building. So I have some books like this one, The 100 Dresses. Doesn't really have a place or fall in line with any of the history, geography, science that we're studying, but it has some character building traits in it that I want to expose my children to. This might fall into one of those weeks that just doesn't perfectly match up. So if I find that I have some empty spaces, I'm going to use some of these other books that are just on my list but didn't necessarily have a perfect place to go. All right, you may not know exactly how to go from here. Maybe you do not have a classical conversations guide and you really are kind of confused of what I'm even talking about. So let me give you what I would suggest if you're trying to build a living book history curriculum and not necessarily follow a history textbook where you read a short passage and answer 10 to 15 questions. You want more of these living books. Here's my suggestion. Figure out the time period that you want to cover in your history curriculum. Are you covering ancient history, medieval, European history, modern day, American history? What's your time period? Once you have that settled down for what you want to cover that entire year, then I want you to just get scrap paper, okay? And you're going to create a timeline. So maybe you're doing 1900 to 2000 or 1800 to 1900, or you're going to do ancient history. You're going to do the Egyptians and things like that. Whatever it is, jot it out. Then do a quick Google search. Go to Sunlight, look up beautiful feet books, look up all these different book lists where people have suggested, read this for this, read this for this. There are so many great lists out there where people have already done that legwork. We read these books when we studied this. We read these books when we studied this. Honestly, these books were things that I found that other people have suggested. I'm looking forward to reading them, but I didn't come up with these lists on my own. So once you have your book list, then you start looking at the dates, okay? If it's in 1835, you're gonna pencil that in. If it's in 1900, you're gonna pencil that in. You have this list and you're just going to make it kind of a timeline. And it doesn't have to be, I'm gonna read this book this week and this book this week. It's gonna be, I'm gonna read this book first. And when we're done with that one, we're going to move to the next one. And when we're done with that one, we move to the next one. You have a timeline of different books that you want to read. And maybe your list is going to be huge like mine, and maybe you're going to have 7. It doesn't matter. One book is better than none, so just find a book and get started with it. It doesn't matter if you have this really big list or just a list of 5 to 10 books. Some is better than none. Guys, I know that I have a really lofty goal. I have a ton of books. And even though some are picture books and some are chapter books and there's kind of a wide range listed here, I know that it's a really lofty goal. And I know that we may not make it through every one of these books that I've listed. It's my plan, and plans change, guys, and that is okay. You need to make sure that even if you do have a plan, you have a goal, you have a timeline, that you give yourself grace and you give yourself permission to deviate from that plan, because it's okay. let me tell you something. I have read very few of these books that I have listed on my list. As a child, I did not read these books. And I like to think that I turned out okay. So in my mind, I'm thinking, even if my kids get a fraction of the books that I have planned out, they're going to be far better. They're going to be more well-versed in history than I ever was, because I didn't read these books as a child. And if we don't get through all of them, that's okay, because there are more years. There are more years to cover American history. We can read them in the summer. We can generate a love for reading and a love for learning that this doesn't have to stop. Once we get to a certain point, we can just keep reading these books. Honestly, even if I read from sun up to sundown, and that's all we did in our homeschool, we'd never get through all the books that I have, planned in my brain, because I want to read all the books, guys. I want to read them all. There's just not enough time. So we need to pick and choose, find ones that we can add to our school, and just do the best we can. And one last thing, if you're reading a book and it's not engaging your kids, if they're just bored to tears, it's okay to set that book aside. It's okay to set it aside and say, we'll try again next year. Or it's okay to set it aside and never touch it again. Life's too short to keep reading a book that is making your kids detest reading or to disdain school and the love of education. Don't waste your time reading a book that no one is enjoying. There are too many good books out there that you could be reading in lieu of that one that's just torturing you and your family. All right, guys, that is how I plan out our year-long reading schedule. Focus on the plan, though. It is just a plan, and I probably won't read all of these books, but I will keep you updated and let you know how it's going. Maybe even share which books we're liking, maybe which ones were like stinkers, and hopefully we won't have any of those. But I don't know. As I mentioned, I haven't read these books. But if you guys have any other questions, I would love to answer them for you. If you know of any of these books, you love them, or they've been hits in your family, or if you guys have any thoughts on what to read when we're getting to the U.S. astronauts or NATO or talking about World War I. If you have any kid-appropriate books, I would love to hear them. But until next time, guys, have a blessed day.